Hello! I want to talk today about something really key to change and progress. Whether it's change from addiction to ex-addict, from chaos to peace, from quitting to succeeding, from trauma to testimony, from being someone you don't like to becoming someone you can really respect. Whatever the change we need. Usually more than one, and they're usually all connected, but there is a crucial element to any progress in positive change, and that is repetition. Repetition. With the True Freedom Addiction Recovery Model, people will start going through the books or they'll have gone through them, and they'll email me or they'll tell me in person how much they're getting it, and they'll refer to aha moments and light bulb moments and when the penny dropped. I'll celebrate with them, but then I'll usually, as much as I can, often warn them that it takes more than reading a new truth once for that truth to actually become part of how we think and who we are. Sometimes true freedom makes so much sense to people that it can cause a false sense of completion. Like, it opens people's eyes so much that they assume they see it all clearly now, when in reality, there's still some blur. And the only way to clear that blur is with repetition. This is true for any revelation, healing, any transformation. Openness to repetition doesn't come naturally to us these days. We're so preconditioned for consumerism, and with that, distraction and entertainment, and we're so easily prone to boredom. Most of us can't even stand in a queue without our phones to go on without getting uncomfortable. When I was a child, my granddad used to say, "Only bored people get bored," and I hated it when he said that. It used to irritate me so much. But now I know he was completely correct. It's only when we've become weak-minded and entertainment dependent that we get bored easily. It's as if a vacuum has been created within ourselves and we need this constant instant gratification and variety to fill that void. That's a problem with us. I have learned to consciously break that preconditioning and to embrace repetition, because I learned how crucial it is to change and growth and healing. Now, whenever I discover a book or video or statement that challenges the way I think or see things, and I know it's a good challenge, I know it's like a key shift for my development, I will go over it again and again and again. Right now, I currently have a book on order. After having already listened to the audio version of it twice. I know I'll definitely listen to the audio version again at least once this year. And I've done the same with a few other books. And back when I stopped smoking permanently, after reading Alan Carr's book, not the comedian, I always say, I had read it before, and then months later, got bad news, in default, went to the shop, smoked again. And then I did read it again when I wasn't ready. So this third time, I knew I needed it really better ingrained in me. So after I'd read it and had my final cigarette, I picked 2 chapters that I thought really wrapped it up well. And I listened to those 2 chapters in the car every day for over a month, as well as reading them in the hard copy many evenings before sleep. Not all evenings, many evenings. And then I listened in the car every week for a couple of months. And the rest is history. I've never been even tempted to pick up a cigarette in the many years since. In fact, that's probably a huge part of what got me so aware and convinced of the necessity of repetition towards change. I have this playlist of short videos that I watch on shuffle every day. There are about 60 videos on this playlist, and I see about an average of maybe 8 to 10 a day. So I see the same video over and over again, week after week. Sometimes, as it's on shuffle, I'll see the same video multiple times in a week. And I'll rarely skip it, because if it's on my playlist, then it's something I need to get into me. And I refuse to become bored by them. I embrace the repetition. I have a collection of scriptures and quotes and my own phrases as well that I read almost every single day. I actually bought a load of black frames, all different sizes, and printed these quotes and stuff in like arty font, and the plan was to create like a montage on my bedroom wall that I would read every time when I stretch in the morning. Now I haven't got around to framing and hanging them all, much to my husband's annoyance because they're in a box still on the floor, but in the meantime I printed them on a document that I read often, and my favourite ones I put on my Motivision board, which I look at every day as part of my morning routine. And True Freedom Part 4 explains what a Motivision board is. It's different to a vision board, it's really good. Anyway, I also have a set of statements that I read aloud to myself each day. And I say read, I don't really read them anymore, I recite them, and that's the whole point. I'm also following this Christian meditation app called Pause. It's brilliant, but it's a 30-day challenge. I did that ages ago. I just keep going back to the beginning and doing it again and again. Although I only do the morning ones now, not the evening ones. But yeah, sure, I could move on to a different app, a different guided meditation, Christian app, whatever. And I would have done in the past. That's what I would have just skipped to a different thing. But there is content in this one that I need to get more in me. So I'm not moving on to anything else yet. And that's just the point. Not just learning something new and important and potentially life-changing, but knowing it by heart, knowing it as my default. So when it matters most, it's there. Knowing it so well, I'm becoming it, letting it reach its life-changing potential and actually changing me. And now, because of this practice, I catch myself before I follow old negative patterns or thoughts or reactions or behaviour. Now, that scripture or that example from that book or the way the person in that video puts it will pop into my mind and redirect me from the old unwanted pathway, steering me back onto the good new pathway that I'm forging and that I want to follow. Remember the mountain watercourse in Milestone 8 and the tractor tracks? Like neurologically in the brain, any change requires repetition. Through going over and over the same bit of ground to create a new path, it's what's required. Repetition causes the brain to make connections and associations and build physical pathways in the brain that then influence our choices and our lives. And the repetition, it strengthens and tightens those pathways and the firing of those synapses, making that thinking and those choices increasingly ingrained and automatic, ultimately dictating our relationships and jobs and dreams and a connection with God, like actually leading them to work out or fail. This is true in the negative and in the positive, in the false and the true. Like if a child is repeatedly told they're stupid, they don't simply believe it in their mind, their brain actually adapts to it and they become less intelligent. In her book Against Self-Sabotage, Jenny Potter shares this story of when she was trying to get a day off school for some reason, and so she claimed that she was sick. Her dad knew better, he knew she was making it up, and so he sent her to school. But she was really offended that her dad didn't believe her. So she persisted in claiming she was sick. She repeated it to anyone who would listen. The whole morning she was getting ready, she was telling it to her brother. The whole time on the way to school, she was telling her brother and she was telling people on the bus, like just repeating, oh, I'm sick, I'm sick. And then once she was at school, lo and behold, she threw up. And the school sent her home. But instead of enjoying the day off, like sneakily, she spent the whole day feeling sick. Repetition changes us. And we can use repetition to make the changes that we want to make. But many of us tend not to realise how much we're repeating already unhealthy, destructive thoughts. Round and round, over and over, about ourselves, about life, about whatever destructive belief has become part of us through repetition. And by adulthood, it's so ingrained, we don't even know we're doing it. For years, my husband would say, "You're doing it again," about me being self-critical. And I hadn't realised at all until he said it. In fact, at first, I didn't fully agree with him. I rationalised the self-criticism into something else because it was so ingrained, and I'd learned that it was bad and that it was unhealthy and I wanted rid of it, but it was so ingrained, I was still doing it. We have these toxic, what John Acuff calls soundtracks, so repeated and ingrained, and then expect one play of a counter-healthy soundtrack to suddenly undo the years of repetition of the bad one. No, we need to repeat the good one. We need to deeply ingrain a new watercourse, a new tractor tire track, a new path. Even just creating a new pathway in general takes a lot of repetition, let alone creating a new one contrary to an unwanted one, a formed old unwanted one. Think about an advanced athlete due to compete. They don't only practice that high jump or that swim until they've reached their goal for the first time. No, they repeat that jump or that swim over and over and over until they meet the goal or exceed it repeatedly, until that becomes their normal height or speed for them. When a child learns a new word, they don't immediately only use that word in context and then moving on to a different word with every attempt at speech. No, they repeat that new word over and over and over and over. Think about how a musician learns to play an instrument. Like, long before they can create unpredictable, fun melodies, they have to repeat the same scales over and over and over again. That's what makes them good. And even when they're advanced and playing intricate pieces of music, they still repeat the scales. And they don't just play a piece that they've got to perform until they can play it successfully once. They repeat it over and over and over until they're getting it right, time after time, until they're feeling it and getting it right, until it's ingrained. Various studies have shown that it takes learning new information an average of 12 times, I think that's the latest conclusion, 12 times before new information becomes part of our thinking. So then what makes us think we can change a negative mindset or replace the trick of addiction with the truth of the trap, or become like a great, more faithful disciple of Jesus without repetition? What makes us think we can renew our mind, as the Bible instructs and as Milestone 8 delves into, without repetition? When I realised that I was in my own way so bad, that the fulfilling calling and the happy relationships and the deep intimacy with Christ and peace and joy was all on the other side of the internal changes I needed to make, my renewing, the change of soundtracks, then I knew I needed to invest in those changes the way an athlete invests in a competition, the way a musician invests in a performance. And I realised that that demanded repetition. Also, I did some math, right? If the effort of learning something once was likely to have little or no lasting results, and the effort of repeating that learning was likely to have huge lasting results, then it made no sense to learn anything life-alteringly valuable only once. And it made sense to repeat that learning as much as possible. Otherwise, the energy of learning it once was basically wasted energy. It's like, why walk through a blizzard 1/10 to my destination? I'm either going to not bother walking through a blizzard at all, or I'm going to walk the whole way. But there's no blizzard about it. I enjoy it now. I enjoy the repetition. I enjoy it becoming familiar. I enjoy, like it becoming committed to my memory and part of how I think, like feeling it changing me for the better. And then I enjoy sharing it with others. In fact, actually, enjoying it is a crucial element to embracing it. Increasing studies are showing and proving that emotion is crucial to the brain to change. The brain won't change based only on information. It has to be felt. Choosing to enjoy the repeated learning will literally boost what the brain needs in order to adapt to what you're learning. This is so interesting. I think we could all assume that emotion is a key component to the heart and even the spirit. And yes, they're all inseparably connected, and it's to our detriment that we ever try to separate them. But how often do we think that to change behaviour or reaction in the brain, you can't just do that with information? If we're wanting to change in the first place, even learning something once, reading True Freedom, listening to a sermon, or reading a book, whatever, then our heart and spirit are already on side. But it's the subconscious brain that needs to get on board through repetition with emotion, through harnessing the right emotions with that repetition. If you choose to be miserable, and it is a choice, if you choose to be miserable through the repetition, then you're giving your brain mixed messages. And there's very little that the brain doesn't cooperate with more than mixed messages. The brain hates mixed messages. One of the crucial benefits of repetition is that it's a physical way of telling your own brain that this matters to you. Like alerting and preparing the brain to change, increasing its neuroplasticity, like physically increasing what it requires to become more malleable to change, such as like BDNN and other proteins and like signaling modules and more. But in fact, the brain, it actually discards what it perceives that you don't value, which is largely what you've discarded or not repeated. For younger ones watching this, something called synaptic pruning is part of the brain's general development. Pruning away what you're not using. Someone under 30, say, picks up True Freedom, reads it, gets all the feel-good, aha moments, and then considers it done and doesn't reread it, doesn't reflect on it, doesn't remember relevant bits of it every time the old pathway throws up temptation or shame or fatalism, like thinking, what's the point? Then your brain won't even store what you read. Like over time, it will discard it because you're not using it. And then short of a miracle, which can happen, but we get stronger when it doesn't through process, as discussed in Milestone 7. But short of a miracle, that one reading of True Freedom becomes pretty much pointless when it's not repeated and remembered and reflected on. And then even in later ages, the brain simply perpetually strengthens and weakens synapses and connections based on how much we're using them. And on top of that, the brain is quicker to discard anything that conflicts with what it's used to. So when we're trying to change, not just add, but change, it's even more the case. The unconscious brain prioritizes energy efficiency and survival. So it chooses the path of least resistance to keep you alive. It resists change and it applies what it's used to based on years of what you've been telling it, after years of whatever childhood experience has told it. For it to change, for it to calculate that the change is worth it, that the effort is worth it, it's got to get a loud and clear message from you that it matters to you. For example, if someone suffers from anxiety, then their amygdala in the brain has calculated and concluded that fight or flight from something uncomfortable is protecting you from threat. And so it will not burn literal caloric energy over extended time, relearning what is or isn't a threat and allowing you to do things that you've previously avoided so that the anxiety gradually reduces. Its job is to protect you and you're still alive. So job done. Carry on as usual. However, if that person recites scripture every day against anxiety and repeatedly reads a book that makes them like eager and inspired and motivated and equipped to overcome anxiety and just speaks to them, and repeatedly watches, for example, it even watches people retraining their amygdala and their autonomic nervous system through like cold water therapy, for example. Soon enough, the amygdala gets the message that the anxiety and avoidance is more painful than the perceived threat. and that change is a priority to you. There are so many other factors to that anxiety. Oh, this study on anxiety is so interesting. Really inspiring, interesting stuff. And a lot of that will be covered in part 4 of True Freedom. But yeah, it'd be too long to get into that now. So another obvious example is addiction. Subconscious parts of the brain, such as the nucleus accumbens with the reward center, the basal ganglia, and the amygdala again plays a big part, and more. These parts, they're just doing what they've been programmed by you to do. Mine are just doing what they've been programmed by me to do. But in addiction, through that trick that addiction plays on the brain, the subconscious mind, and on society, and on the conscious mind, like I've said before, these are not reasoning parts of the brain that we're talking about here. As far as they're concerned, you've stayed alive this long, this way. These parts of the brain aren't concerned with quality of life or patterns of decline over time or truth. They just keep doing what they've always done long enough to continue doing efficiently with little effort. Like the watercourse, following the ingrained watercourse down the mountain in milestone 8. Why would these subconscious parts of the brain make the effort to change? Only because you give them the message that it matters enough, that continuing the same is a greater risk and pain than changing. And one of the most successful ways to get that message through is with the repetition of the right message, coupled with positive emotion around it. Like, that is the way. Like, there's other stuff too, but repetition's so key. It's almost like trying to convince a toddler to stop playing with a hand grenade that it picked up as a toy. Any adult in their right mind would calmly repeat to the child, "Give the bad bomb to auntie." Like, you know, such an adult might elaborate, but generally the adult will repeat the key instruction to hand it over. And we'll do it with a forced, bouncy, smiley voice, so the instruction appears emotionally pleasing to the child. Like, what any adult wouldn't do is repeat it once, say, "Give that to me," and then give up. And be like, "Oh, you know, it didn't work." Repeating the instruction would make the child realise that it matters. And what would backfire really badly as well, though, is if the adult repeated the instruction, but with visible anger or fear or any unpleasant emotion, like that unpleasant emotion then gets attached to the instruction for the child and discourages the child from following the instruction. The subconscious brain is not dissimilar to that toddler. We can use the super simple tool of repetition to get the toddler, baby, computer, algorithm brains to get the message that something new or different is important and valuable enough to burn the energy to adapt to. So in part 4 of True Freedom, repetition is part of saturation, which is one of the keys to change that I talk about. Whether it's addiction, poor self-image, a short temper, self-limiting beliefs, lack of self-discipline, perfectionism, or anything. Like, repetition of revelatory truth against those negatives is a priceless key to changing out of those negatives. Until a few years ago, I never repeated anything. Like, even basic stuff that ordinary people would repeat without thinking. Like, I couldn't even take a course of antibiotics properly because it involved too much repetition for me. Like, seriously, I was that undisciplined. And even things that I did do every day, I did differently every day, like chaotically, like whether it's sleeping or eating, like there was no repetition. So the idea of reading a book more than once would have been ludicrous to me back then. If I couldn't repeat a simple, like 3-second task that solved a strongly felt physical ailment there and then, like, why would I repeat a huge effort of reading something that helped with a problem that I could bury my head about or pretend would get better on its own or convince myself is normal or unsolvable anyway? Like, it's hard to come up with excuses not to take another antibiotic, but countless excuses are easy to think of against a greater effort like reading or whatever. Let alone then repeating it. Oh, But I couldn't escape the facts. The power of repetition is undeniable. And I either wanted to get better or I didn't. But soon enough, it became a natural desire. I quickly realised that, that powerful quote or life-changing book wasn't giving me the power or changing my life the way I needed, because it was merely just new information. Even if it wowed me in the moment, it was just new information, it wasn't transformation. For example, I used to have such a blockage to experiencing God's love, like a deep, stubborn blockage. And I read many scriptures on the topic, but Ephesians 3:17-19, I think, struck me. It jolted me with truth. I also read a couple of books that really impacted me. But it wasn't until I read that passage of the Bible every day, memorized it, watched teachings on it, read teachings on it repeatedly in quick succession, repeated declaration, declaring it in first person present tense over and over and over. It wasn't until then that the blockage started to crack and then crumble. There were other things holding me back, and I'd hear or read something that made so much sense. I thought, surely having read or heard that would stop me carrying on the same. But lo and behold, I would revert again. I would default back to my norm until I learnt the key of repetition. Every now and then, I hear or see something that changes my view forever, straight away. And absolutely, there are times when God does a miracle, but otherwise, it's a process. And the new doesn't replace the old just because it's true or better. The new information is exposure, and that's crucial. It's a crucial first step. We can't learn better ways without seeing that better ways exist. But once we're exposed to truth, we can change according to that truth by saturating ourselves in it. And partly and crucially, some of that saturation is repetition. Regarding the True Freedom Recovery books, one day I will record an audio version, and I'm gonna create an app that's all planned. I'm really excited about it, and a journal specifically designed to reinforce truth. So this will be various forms of getting it in, and also a video course one day too. But in the meantime, many people go through the True Freedom books multiple times, getting more out of it each time. And although these videos are about more than addiction, and I don't repeat like what's in the True Freedom books, they're still reinforcement of that truth. So, repeat. One person told me, he emailed me and said that he'd actually recorded himself reading True Freedom so he could listen to it in the car every day, as well as rereading it in the hard copy at home. That would be so powerful for so many reasons, not least of all because it's engaging different parts of the brain with the same truth, which is so important. And this is why I use repetition in my own life in as many forms as possible, and want to create more forms for True Freedom. And this is why, already the True Freedom books encourage you to teach it back when you see those symbols, teach it back moments at various points, and also giving that the creative, the interactive opportunities. That's why. Meanwhile, there's a guy in our Hope Centre, one of our Hope Centre homes, who has written overviews of the subheadings of True Freedom on post-it notes, and drawn the graphs and all of that, and stuck those post-it notes all around his door, so that he reads them every time he leaves his room. I'm surprised it doesn't make him late, because I assumed he was skimming. But he said, no, I read them. I stand and read them multiple times a day when I'm leaving my room. And I told him, soon you'll know them by heart by doing that, and then they'll start to pop into your mind whenever you need them, which is paving the way to complete and full, true freedom from addiction in his life. It's always pleasant to hear people say they're getting more out of True Freedom every time they read it, but actually that's not where the real gold is. The real gold is when you're repeating it again, beyond seeing something new that you missed in there, to the point where you're having your own contribution, additional thoughts that back it up and take it further, because it's become so familiar, so ingrained, so part of your default thinking, that you're coming up with examples and analogies from your own life and your own creativity, where it's like so in you. So whether it's the True Freedom books and these videos, whether it's the future True Freedom media coming up as well, whether it's that book that made you see forgiveness as a good thing for the first time ever, or a TED talk that opened your eyes to the damage that perfectionism is doing in your life, or a quote that puts something in a way that just really drives the point home for you. And certainly when it comes to the Bible, embrace repetition. Embrace repetition, embrace repetition, embrace repetition, embrace repetition, and do it with joy. Embrace repetition.